Hey, hey, hey! Welcome to my cozy corner of the internet. This is Nephilim VA bringing you the 23rd chapter of Inheritance, written by Aizawa on AO3. Before I say anything else, I just want to say thank you so much for 1k subscribers. I never thought I would ever get here, but I am just so grateful. Where we last left off, Izuku had a rough day with Bakugo being a villain during battle training. All we can hope is that he recovers well. Before we find out, here are the trigger warnings. This fanfiction is for mature audiences with canon-typical violence and a trigger warning for major character death. If that isn't your style, then I recommend Shades of Green, which is written by Maybe It's Friendly on AO3. It can be found on my channel! Canon Divergence is the name of the game and indulges the what-ifs of Midoriya Izuku having a quirk. With that being said, the chapter summary is as followed. Actions meet consequences. Now I implore you to sit back and relax whilst I read to you. Chapter 23. The following day had its ups and downs. The first half of the day was fine. Izuku had managed to get all of his homework done despite his long nap the evening before. It was after that, when the final heroes and villain matches finished, that things got complicated. They dissected each battle, discussing strategy, compatibility of quirks, successes and failures of everyone's matches, but they saved the first for last. Izuku's fight with Kachan seemed to be the one that everyone had an opinion about, and many were divided on how it was handled on both sides. Izuku listened and took notes about everything they said, especially where it pertained to him, and didn't say much unless he was asked to clarify something. This was a time to listen, to critique, not to argue about whether the choices he made were the correct ones. Kachan, on the other hand, seemed to take everything anyone said as an insult or a personal attack, especially those who said that his escape excuse and subsequent attack from behind was a stretch in explaining his behaviour. He shouted and growled and threatened every person who dared to criticize him, even if no one seemed to feel threatened by any of it. All Might let them hash it out for a while, until Kachan started literally sparking off at people. "These are all very interesting points," All Might conceded. "I find it very telling in many ways how many of you took this assignment very seriously, and embraced your role as though it was an actual real-life scenario. Also, as Yaoyorozu pointed out, many of you used the fact that it was a school exercise and exploited the parameters to your advantage, knowing that in a real-life situation, that wouldn't fly." Many of the class looked at each other either guiltily or triumphantly. That started out another rehash of who had taken their roles seriously and who hadn't. Ida was pleased that everyone in his hero-villain group agreed that he had taken the role of villain wholeheartedly, but Izuku couldn't fathom it. He wished, not for the first time, that they had been allowed to hear what everyone was saying during their turns. He'd only known the speedster for 3 days, but it was pretty obvious that Ida was a die-hard rule follower. Still, his team had won, so there was no arguing with the results of his team-up with Uraraka. The bell rang while they were teasing Aoyama about accidentally burning a hole through the missile with his naval laser. Everyone gathered their things and were standing to leave, when Aizawa called out that Bakugo and Midoriya should stay behind. Izuku sank back down into his seat, wondering what this was about, but afraid he already knew. His battle with Kachan had gotten personal on both sides, and now they were both going to be in trouble for it. Aizawa came and sat in Sero's chair, facing the two boys with a sigh. "You can guess why I asked you both to stay behind," he said. "Tch," Kachan said. It was a noise dripping with derision. "Sorry, Sensei," Izuku said contritely. "Why are you apologizing?" he said, his voice giving nothing away. "I fought dirty," Izuku said, "because I was angry." Aizawa looked at Kachan and just waited. "What?" Kachan asked defensively. "I didn't do anything wrong." When Aizawa just continued to stare at him, Izuku squirmed uncomfortably in his seat. He really wanted to say something to Kachan about being more cooperative and respectful to their teacher, but didn't think it would be appreciated by either of them. When Kachan didn't say anything further and just stared defiantly, Aizawa pulled out his phone and showed them a photo. Izuku had already seen it, his back before it had been healed. Izuku remembered having a slight freak-out when he'd noticed blood in his urine last night, before remembering he'd taken damage to his kidney earlier. Even though the injury had been healed, the blood had already been shed. The picture didn't seem to have any effect on Kachan, who stared at it with a bored expression. Aizawa flicked at the screen with his thumb, bringing up another picture. This time, Izuku gasped at the sight of Kachan lying in a bed in the nurse's office. Both of Kachan's eyes were black and swollen shut, and the pillow beneath his head was stained with blood. His throat was a mass of purple bruises that travelled up to his jawline and down his collarbones. His costume had been peeled away to reveal a shoulder resting at an odd angle, much lower than the other, and bruised just as badly as Izuku's back had been. Izuku could feel tears sting the backs of his eyes and pull on his lashes. The pain must have been unbelievable, and it was a mercy that Kachan had been unconscious for it. Recovery Girl was right. Kachan could have easily snapped his neck, and Izuku would have had to live knowing that he'd had a part in it. Aizawa's eyes flicked briefly to Izuku before going back to bore into Kachan's steely gaze. This time, the blonde was scowling at the picture, then looking away as though embarrassed. He still didn't offer any kind of remorse or explanation. "Let me tell you my observations about this fight," Aizawa said quietly. For all he spoke softly, his words were very impactful and filled Izuku with a feeling of dread. First, Midoriya. A throat punch is fighting dirty, but let me be the first to tell you that it's a valid tactic. It's quick and often disabling in a situation that needs an especially fast solution. The media will drag you for it, but you'll probably be alive to live through the bad press. Use it sparingly. Izuku didn't tell him that he wasn't the first to tell him this, but that was because he had a huge lump in his throat that he wasn't sure he could speak around. He nodded jerkily. The rest of your fight was pretty clean. You telegraph a bit too much, you're too trusting. Those are things we can correct. He nodded again, taking comfort in the implication that he was not going to be expelled for his actions. Now for you, Bakugo, he continued. The first thing you did wrong was not listening to your partner. Yaoyorozu isn't a recommendation student for nothing. She's incredibly intelligent, capable, and inventive. She still lost a half and half, Kachan grumbled, making Izuku want to scream at him to shut up for his own good. Would that still be true if you followed the plan she wanted to use? Aizawa asked. Kachan shrugged and looked away. It made Izuku wonder what Yaoyorozu's plan had been. He'd have to remember to ask her. Your second mistake was not only underestimating your partner, but also your opponents. Todoroki was also a recommendation student. He got edged out by Midoriya, but if there had been fewer recommended students this year, he would have won that spot easily. You were outclassed and outmatched from the get-go. Bullshit! Kachan spat, finally showing some emotion. How so? Aizawa asked, as if one of his students hadn't just sworn at him disrespectfully. Izuku was also curious about this. Kachan wasn't in middle school anymore, where he'd been a big fish in a small pond. This was UA, where the standards were high and the student's skill even higher. Had he expected to walk in and own the place? Maybe he had. I'm better than any of them, Kachan averred, even though he had no proof at the moment. No, you're not, Aizawa said flatly. So let me set the record here straight. You almost didn't make the cut into UA for the start. Your discipline records show you've got a mean streak and a bad habit of bullying. We don't tolerate that here. Izuku was shocked by this, though maybe he shouldn't have been. How far back did they look at records? Karchan had been a jerk in middle school, but he hadn't particularly been out of control. At least not that Izuku knew about. Maybe he'd found someone new to pick on. Karchan looked as though Aizawa had slapped him across the face. Your one saving grace was the entrance exam, where you took on the 0-pointer to save Uraraka from being crushed while she was trapped in the rubble. That was what convinced the committee to give you a chance. That, and the fact you've kept your nose relatively clean for the past couple of years, and scored very highly on the written exam. Izuku chewed on his lower lip. Remembering the first day of school, Uraraka had thanked Karchan for saving her from the 0-pointer, and he had said he hadn't done it for her. Had that been true, or had that been a typical Karchan response, trying to seem aloof and cool? If it was true, the committee had misunderstood Karchan's intentions, and he had only passed due to a stroke of luck. Karchan seemed to realize it too. He clamped his mouth shut so tight his jaw bunched and his lips compressed into a thin line. You've got talent, Aizawa conceded. Your quirk is powerful and you have excellent control over it. However, your battle exercise told a story of a hothead who can't handle teamwork or failure with dignity. You flouted the rules of the scenario to continue to attack a classmate, one you have a past history of bullying. If it had been anyone else you went after, we might have just chalked it up to zealousness, but it wasn't. Not only did you attack him when you were declared eliminated, you were planning on pulling the pin on your gauntlet at close range indoors. He would have dodged, Karchan said petulantly, but without much venom. Undoubtedly, Aizawa agreed. Do you know what would have happened to him if he wasn't able to dodge and you made a hit? Karchan was looking at the top of his desk now, looking as though he might throw up. Izuku wondered if he should ask to leave, since his role in the conversation seemed to be over. He didn't get the chance. You're the one who designed and made the specifications for your costume. You know that your gauntlets store a significant amount of your sweat in order to set off especially large explosions. To set one off at close range indoors could have had two possible outcomes out of many that would have been catastrophic. What do you think they are? When Karchan didn't answer, unable to look at their teacher, Aizawa turned to Izuku. What are they? He asked more kindly. The building could have taken damage that could have destabilized it. If it had hit a load-bearing wall, it could have collapsed part of it, Izuku said, having already considered this when doing his homework. That's one, Aizawa agreed. What about what could have happened to you? Almost anything, Izuku answered, trying to evade giving the answer he knew his teacher expected, depending on whether or not I could dodge in time. If you couldn't? Aizawa asked. It probably would have killed me, Izuku admitted. He had considered this as well. He doubted that it had been Karchan's goal. He probably absolutely believed that Izuku would dodge. Still, it was still a possibility. He had wondered why the team that made their costumes would allow such a dangerous support item, and guessed that they had assumed a hero would never use it against another human being. Aizawa's gaze swung back to the top of Karchan's head. It could have killed him, and it almost killed you. He pointed out grimly. You were reckless and vengeful. Those are two things that will get yourself or someone else killed in most situations. Izuku was stunned to see a tear drop from Karchan's downturned face and splatter on the desktop. Was it from regret? Rage? Helplessness? It made Izuku's heart hurt in an indescribable way that wasn't anger or anything like that. Maybe it was pity. So the question now is, how do we handle this? Aizawa asked. The feeling of dread in Izuku's chest doubled. Karchan's head jerked up, seemingly of its own accord, and the dread Izuku felt was mirrored in the other boy's expression. Normally, I'd just expel you, the teacher said bluntly. Cut my losses and send you packing without losing a moment of sleep over it. After hearing that Aizawa had expelled an entire class before, he was surprised that Karchan wasn't already on his way out the door. But Karchan managed to croak. The powers that be have asked me to reconsider and mete out a different punishment, he said, not sounding happy about it. I'm not convinced, so I agreed to a compromise. Both boys looked at Aizawa, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Their teacher rubbed at his eyes with his fingers before retrieving a bottle of eye drops and administering them, letting them wait. Midoriya gets to decide, he finally said, whether you'll be expelled or sent to general studies instead. You're being dropped from the hero program until after the sports festival, but have a slim chance of returning to the hero course if you stay out of trouble and perform well in the festival. If Izuku decides you can stay, you will also be required to perform 100 hours of community service at the place of our choosing. Izuku's jaw dropped. He couldn't believe they were putting this on his shoulders. Why? Karchan must have been thinking the same because his expression twisted. Everything in his demeanor said that he expected to be tossed out. Izuku went with his instincts. I think he should stay, Izuku said quietly, not looking at Karchan. He felt conflicted, since his life would be so much easier without having Karchan there all the time. He was trying to think of what All Might would do, or what Sir would have to say about it. He has an amazing quirk and intuitive fighting skills. He needs to learn to care about people. Am I allowed to suggest that his community service involve helping other people in some way, and not just doing chores or picking up trash or something? Karchan was strangely quiet about this. Izuku looked at him, expecting to see disgust or anger, but instead he saw skepticism and suspicion. So I can come back if I do well at the sports festival? Karchan asked, his voice sounding raw. And stay out of trouble and complete your community service. I would also strongly suggest making a standing appointment with our school counselor to help you get that ego under control. Aizawa looked 100% serious about this. Izuku was hopeful Karchan would accept, and half hopeful he'd cut his losses and leave. Did that make him a bad person? Izuku, I believe your ride home is waiting for you, Aizawa said after that. You go on ahead while Bakugo and I finish our discussion. Izuku quickly gathered his bag and bolted for the door, not wanting to witness any more of this discussion than he already had. He would find out tomorrow whether or not Karchan took the offer to stay or not. He found All Might waiting for him near his van, scrambled in and buckled his seatbelt in a hurry. I can see you've survived your meeting with Aizawa, All Might said, sliding into the driver's seat and starting the ignition. You knew about that, huh? Izuku asked, feeling mildly ill after making such an important decision for someone else. I was going to be the one to meet with you both, but my time in that form ran out before I had the chance, All Might said ruefully. Plus, I think in this case, Aizawa was probably scarier than I could have been. So the point was to scare Karchan? Izuku asked. Yes and no, All Might said, pulling into traffic. A lot of factors came into play in this situation, including a long phone conference with his parents last night to discuss it. It was their idea to let you decide if he should be allowed to stay at UA, but he was going to lose his place in the hero course regardless. His parents hope that this will scare him straight, so to speak. I feel kind of bad, but at the same time... There's no shame in being relieved, All Might told him quietly. Especially with the past you both share. Aizawa agreed to let you decide to determine young Bakugo's fate, because it would help him keep his reputation for being willing to expel anyone at any time intact. That boy has serious potential, but it's wasted on a personality like that. If he can learn to actually care for others instead of always seeing himself as a victim, he could turn out to be a great hero. It's up to him now. Izuku wasn't sure how to feel about all of this. Was Karchan capable of learning such a thing after all this time? So you think I made the right choice in saying he should stay? There was no doubt in my mind that you would choose that. You're the opposite of everything he is, sometimes to a fault, All Might said simply. But that throat punch? Izuku blushed and shifted in his seat. Yeah, I really do feel bad about that. If I hadn't done that, maybe things wouldn't have been so bad for Karchan's injuries. I'm pretty sure it would have ended badly either way, All Might told him. But it's still unseemly. Thanks, Gran. Probably, Izuku said, but maybe not as bad. Sensei showed us some pictures of Karchan's injuries, and they were terrible. I was scared that my being there might have made them worse, since my quirk can sense when someone is hurt like that. All Might took his eyes off the road to look at Izuku for a moment, and it took him a while to reply. That is something we will definitely have to take into account. In the field, you will come across victims who are weak and close to dying. That's the nature of rescue work, and damn near unavoidable, All Might told him. Izuku had thought about this before, but his mind always tried to shy away from thinking about it too hard because of the implications. Because you can't be around someone too weak for any length of time, we will have to find a solution, a way of keeping people safe from you and vice versa, All Might mused. I'll have Mirai call some support companies and see if some sort of shield or suppressor might help. Maybe call David to start him looking into it. Izuku knew that Mirai was Sir Nightie's first name, and he suspected that David was referring to David Shield, the American that had worked with All Might in the United States when he'd been fresh out of UA. He felt humbled and awed that such a famed scientist might be able to help him. In the meantime, if you come across a case like that where you're not sure someone is going to survive, it's best that you clear out and let others handle that person. You'll help them more by not helping them, if that makes sense. In the event of larger disasters, there are always a lot of people who need rescuing that you won't pose any danger to. Izuku nodded glumly. Wouldn't that make him half a hero? What if I'm the only one around? He asked. In that case, you have to let your heart decide. If the choice is them dying without help or dying knowing someone is doing everything they can, which do you think they choose? All Might asked gently. You also have to decide how willing you are to bear their quirk for the rest of your life, which is no small consideration. Izuku thought back to the discussions and lessons he'd had with Sir about ethics and morals and hard choices. Somehow, in all of that, Izuku had never imagined making a choice between what kind of inevitable death one person might have. It was a heavy weight in the back of his mind. All Might steered into the pull-up curb in front of his building and put a hand on Izuku's shoulder. Remember that this is likely a temporary problem, he said in a comforting voice. We'll find a solution, and then nothing can stop you. Izuku hoped that was true. Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate all the support you've given me. Aizawa giving Izuku such a big decision was anxiety-inducing. Like, Jesus Christ, that would weigh on my soul knowing the fate of a peer was in my hands. It's a lot. I had a couple pain flares in the past week, but I got through them as best I could, and I hope that you are overcoming the struggles you are having because I know you are strong, powerful, and amazing. All credits go to the original creator of this fanfiction. A is for Amy71 on AO3. I would highly appreciate it if you gave this video a like and you subscribe to the channel and you hit the notification bell to be notified of my next upload. There is no pressure to do so though. Thank you for visiting my cozy corner of the internet. Keep growing my sunflowers. Mwah!